YouTube, what's going on? Thank you for clicking on the video. The Black Ops 6 multiplayer open beta gave us a glimpse into how the game is going to look and feel when it launches across 3 generations of hardware in little under a month's time, with the full game coming to PlayStation 4 and 5, Xbox One and Series XS, and finally PC on October 26th. And I'm sure a lot of you out there are wondering, after all of the recent performance and FOV debates that we've had over the past couple of years, is it good? Should you upgrade your hardware? Should you buy the game? Should COD even sell it on the console that you're going to be playing on? Well, I dug through the old tech pile and managed to get some time in on PlayStation 4, Xbox Series X, and of course my PC, which I play on every day. And you're really going to want to see how this game looks and feels, especially if you're playing on the older generation hardware, PS4 or Xbox One. Before I get into things, I want to stress I have no personal bias in this. I have no stakes in the console war, Xbox or PlayStation. I really don't care. And I'm aware that these game files are going to feel different between an 8th generation PS4, which has been out for 11 years, and a PC, which has a graphics card that was released only 2 years ago and is top of the line specs. But that said, I think some of the footage in this video is still going to shock you all the same. So if this opens your eyes at all or helps inform your buying decision, then do me a favor and drop a like and comment on the video and subscribe to the channel for more Black Ops 6 content. Let me start with a couple of quick notes that I think are important for the context of the video. I've kept my brightness at 50, FOV at 110, and depth of field off for all of the gameplay across every platform that I've played on here. And I tried to get some footage on the same map so that I could do some direct comparisons where possible. The PS4 that I played on is a PS4 Slim, so there is some marginal gains that you could get on the older gen hardware that I've tried. And as for the Xbox footage, that's recorded on an Xbox One X, which was running at 120 Hz but only capturing at 60 Hz. That's just because I'm running an old capture card. And then finally, my PC footage has been recorded on a very new build, running a Ryzen 7800 X3D CPU and an Nvidia 4090 graphics card. So this thing should perform like a beast, but just to highlight, I've kept most of my PC settings medium across the board to balance performance and quality. But anyway, let's dive into the PC gameplay and discuss some of the pros and cons of that experience. To get straight to the point, the PC experience of Black Ops 6 is simply the best and smoothest experience that I've had across any of the 3 platforms that I've tested things on. And I expect that it'll be that way for anybody who has a graphics card that is of a 30 series or above. The graphics look really good on the game, the texture quality is really strong, there's a deep render distance that you can work with so you can see all of this detail in the background even when you're playing, which to me helps the opponents stand out a little bit more when they're in the foreground. You don't have all this kind of blur going on in the background as well. Obviously, PC has drastically more options when it comes to quality customization and the general look of the game and how intense or realistic you want things to be, depending on the level of hardware that you run and, you know, how much your PC can cope with. There's good shadows and depth to the characters. There's very little tearing or any issues like that. Obviously, there's a lot of issues that we have seen on PC during the beta and even on Modern Warfare 3 during Season 5 and 6 with packet burst that's come from a change they made to on-demand texture streaming. But putting that aside, just the base layer of the game, running at medium to the lower end of high settings, it runs super smoothly, and I'm sure that this packet burst issue that, by the way, is affecting everybody on Xbox and PlayStation as well, will eventually be worked out by the team over at Activision. There are a couple of issues on the PC side of things, although I will say that these aren't particularly exclusive to Black Ops 6 and rather just issues with Call of Duty on PC in general. Obviously, I've mentioned the on-demand texture streaming, which is causing some issues with connectivity and stutters and hitching, but then you have a couple of other issues as well around optimization, the size of the game file. You know, I think the beta was around about 30-40 gigabytes for PC, which isn't too bad, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, every COD game that I play on PC is bigger than the vast majority of other PC games that I play, and, you know, don't get me wrong, I don't play that many, but all the same, it's not the smoothest PC port that's out there of all the different genres of games that there are. You've then got the old COD HQ issue with the whole changing from one application to another, or not, but you are, where you constantly get this update requires restart. You load up the COD HQ, close it down to load up Black Ops 6, load that back up because update requires restart, go and port back over to COD HQ, you have to close back down, open back up again. I know that everything's being ran through COD HQ so that the settings and the quality and all of that can stay very streamlined across the different platforms. I'm sure that's an absolute nightmare to manage, but from a user experience, this is still one of my biggest issues with playing COD on PC, the whole update requires restart thing. I don't understand why it's like that. It was like that in the beta. It's like that on Modern Warfare 3. It'll probably be like that when the full game releases. There are some performance flags as well, just for context. Modern Warfare 3, when I'm playing multiplayer, I can get 300 FPS pretty smooth, like non-stop. Weekend 1 of the beta, I was anywhere from 180 to 220 on like low settings. Weekend 2 of the beta, I kicked everything up to around about medium, optimized a couple of things, was very consistently and steadily at around about 250. And then there were even some games where I was just like rock at 300 FPS basically. Much more like I was still playing on Modern Warfare 3. Clearly they've optimized things with all the user data that they've gained from weekend 1 to weekend 2 of the beta. I'm sure they'll be doing the same thing between weekend 2 and the full release, and then even within the first couple of weeks of launch, which will help smooth that whole playing experience. And I'm sure as new graphics drivers drop that are optimized for the game, then it will only get smoother as well. But generally speaking, aside from those minor issues, which again for the most part aren't exclusive to PC, and then otherwise don't necessarily affect the performance and rather just the broader experience, PC was still unrivaled the best gameplay that I've got, and you can see how smooth everything looks in the background in all of this footage that's been playing. Moving on to the Xbox Series X, and this is the 9th generation console, so the equivalent of the PS5, the current hardware that we're working with and probably will be for the next few years as well. I gotta say, this is probably going to be the shortest section of the video because there's not really a lot to write home about. The game felt super good on my Xbox Series X, and the easiest way for me to say this is that it just performs how you would expect Call of Duty on console to. I'm sure while the game's been built, it's been really optimized for this tech that the majority of the player base either has or will have to have in the next couple of years. But as you can see from the gameplay I've got in the background here, everything felt super smooth. There's a good level of detail to all of the graphics. The textures feel crisp and clean. There's not really any weird lighting bugs or shadows. Everything's very responsive, very quick. And one other thing that I did test but I didn't actually record is that you can freely adjust the FOV all the way up to 120, all the way down to 80 odd, and not really feel any difference in performance whatsoever. Of course, that was one of the biggest complaints during the Warzone 1 era of Call of Duty, that console players weren't able to adjust their FOV at all. Obviously, it put you at a major disadvantage. I used to play on PlayStation like permanently, so I understand how frustrating that is, but clearly the work that the developers have done in putting this together has meant that the game runs really efficiently on the latest generation of hardware. And I gotta say, I was pleasantly surprised at just how smooth this experience was. I was expecting there to be at least 1 or 2 bugs that I could pull out and say like, hey, you know, console players, there's at least this that I, you know, certainly wouldn't want to deal with. But generally speaking, there was nothing major at all. Loading screens were pretty quick. I'd say they took about as much time as the PC to take me from lobby into the game. And the menus were very responsive as well, which, you know, is a small factor of the game, but it's something that I had issues with back in Cold War, back in Vanguard, where on console they were quite unresponsive and it'd take time for text or icons or anything to load in while you were scrolling between, you know, your loadouts or anything like that. But I mean, without holding a stopwatch, I think we're looking at under a second's delay for all of the things to load in here, and that's pretty impressive. You know, I think the current generation of consoles have got a lot of flack, probably for a number of reasons, be it the price point or availability issues, but certainly for me, if I had to, I wouldn't mind playing on Xbox One. I'm always going to choose my PC for obvious reasons, but Xbox One I'd be very happy to pick up a controller and run with. Finally, that brings me on to the PS4 gameplay that I captured, and this is definitely where I have the most say because my experience was not good on PlayStation 4. I would not want to buy this game on PS4 just from the beta experience. But before I show you why, I do want to take a minute just to remind you of where we're at with the current console builds. With Black Ops Cold War releasing on the 9th generation consoles back in 2020, we're now into the 4th year of supporting both the old hardware and the new hardware in the latest Call of Duty builds, which means we're at the point where we're asking, is the older generation hardware holding the newer gen build of the game back so that everything still runs widely the same? Or is the older gen build even playable at this point when you compare it to the newer gen build? Of course, this isn't the first time that we've had past and current generation handovers in the Call of Duty franchise. We had Black Ops 3, Advanced Warfare, and I believe Ghosts launch on both the Xbox 360 and the Xbox One and the PS3 4, meaning we had 3 years before they left the old hardware in the past back then, of course, onto our 4th year now. And the reason why this upgrade cycle has probably lasted longer this time round can likely be explained by information shared in Sony's latest game service report, which shows that even 11 years after the initial launch of the PS4, half of the PlayStation player base is still on the older gen hardware. There's roughly 49 mil both on the PS4 and the PS5. Of course, that means it'd be a huge market for Call of Duty to leave behind or essentially force into upgrading if they still want their players to be able to play the latest COD. And when you take into consideration we're at a time of global tech shortages and even cost of living squeezes, you can understand why they might not be rushing into things. That said, and I promise to be honest, my experience with the PS4 build of the game was really bad, and personally, I would not be happy whatsoever if I paid £60, $70 for the full game and this is how it played when it fully launches in October. Of course, it's not as bad as to not know what map you're playing or something like that, but the textures are not great and they get worse with render distance as well as you look further out of the peripheral view of your player. If I zoom in on screen a little bit, you can see how blurred out everything starts to get as you look further into the peripheral view of your player. I think that the colors are more washed out on PlayStation in general. The text is much lower quality as well. well. Again, I'll try and put a side by side for comparison here, but this is just not nearly as clear. And those washed out colors don't help as well because it kind of blurs into the kill feed. I think PS4 had the lowest or worst player visibility out of all the platforms that I tested by a considerable distance. Or at least if it's not so much an issue of the quality, it was more difficult just to actually understand when I was fighting an enemy operator as opposed to just seeing movement on my screen. Some of the visual effects on it feel very, very strange. I think like the smoke around your gun feels added in, almost like dropped on top, like another layer on top of the game, and it just makes it really difficult to see. It gives it the kind of ugly, jarring effect that Modern Warfare 2 had with all of that extra added smoke for realism's sake, and it feels super disruptive to the gameplay. The water and reflective textures, again, are pretty poor. I know that there's no way to customize these on PS4 or on Xbox, you know, be it 9th gen or 8th gen, and of course you're going to get more out of the hardware on PC versus console here, but all the same, comparatively, this just felt considerably worse on PlayStation, to a point where it wasn't even keeping up with the rest of the game, which felt like it was so far behind compared to the 9th generation and PC. There are lots of spots of hazy and like smoky glows, particularly where you're in like light spots. I think there's a spot on Gala where there's obviously either a ceiling light or windows in the roof, whatever it may be, and you have light breaking through. On Xbox and on PC, this feels like just a brighter spot of the map. It feels very natural and like it's kind of seamless with everything around. On PS4 though, I don't know, it just, again, it felt layered onto the screen, so it felt like an obstruction rather than something that, you know, in theory should help you see better, where there's more lighting on the map. There's a similar spot in Pit as well, under the ladder, where there's like a close light reflection off a back wall, and rather than it feeling very natural, very subtle, and aiding your visibility, it actually hampers it because you just kind of have this glare in your face, which again, you know, it just makes it more difficult in gunfights. As well as this, I definitely noticed more screen tearing on PS4. I'm sure there were like minor bits on Xbox or PC that I maybe didn't notice, but I never felt like I had screen tearing when I was playing on either of those. On PS4, I did considerably, and I could see it on my screen. I can see it in the recording. It may not be like the absolute worst thing in the world, especially if it were just happening on its own, but when you combine that with all of these issues around the lighting, the visibility, the poor jagged textures, again, you start to get to a point where performance now is feeling really, really hampered, and it's looking pretty bad quality. Another thing that I noticed was delay in the menus, delayed loading of the icons and stuff. I mentioned this being a problem in the past. I understand there's a lot of data to load, and we're talking about older hardware here, but there were points where I was going into games and the map just wasn't loading, or I get like the background art, but then the minimap would never load up on screen. There were some games that I loaded into and the countdown, it wasn't at 7 or 5 or 3 or anything. We were literally starting the game. People were running out in front of me already because their game had loaded in so much faster. And again, even when you're scrolling through your loadout, or even when you're back in the main menu itself, icons for your guns, icons for the actual menu settings, etc., they're just taking like a second or longer to load up in some cases, and it's just really poor. It's really jarring. You can feel the delay between pressing the buttons and the menu actually activating. But while I'm touching on the menus, and I've already mentioned quality and, you know, performance impacts around that, I have to touch on the biggest and the most blatant issue for me, which is major lag when you bring up the scoreboard every time, no matter what the map or mode, when I was playing on PS4. I've got a clip from Pit that I'll drop on screen while I'm talking here, where I was literally just moving back and forward with Omni movement. Not sliding or anything, literally just jogging around and just pushing the menu button. And not only is there like a 2-second delay between me actually pushing the menu button and it coming up, it's not a delay, it's a full-on stutter, lag, the whole screen stops. And I mean, look, I don't know if a second or 2 is exaggerating or anything, but this is noticeable. You can see how bad this looks on screen, and let me tell you, it feels equally as bad in game. There is a blatant delay between the button push and the reaction. There's a delay between the game registering it and the game loading it, and it impacts the actual gameplay itself. Like, genuinely, this is a really bad clip in my opinion. And as far as something to show the performance feel, you know, something that's very intrinsic, the reaction time between you pressing a button and how your screen responds, this has got to be the best footage for me to show you how it really felt for me playing on PS4 as a broad experience. The gunfights were very similar as well, where you're getting in, shooting at people and dying instantly, or people appear on your screen and you're dead instantly because they've already started firing before your console's even registered that you're in a gunfight. Look, I won't go any further on that one. I'll say that it's playable, the game played, but this was not a good experience. And again, if I own this console, if I pre-ordered this, if I bought this on release day, stayed up late, woke up late for it, whatever, I don't know, I would be really disappointed with where my money had gone, because that did not feel anything like even the Xbox. I'm not trying to compare this directly to my PC. You're talking about 11-year-old hardware, which has been bettered within the same generation, let alone a whole nother generation on top of it, and then the newest technology in PCs. This felt like a different game to Xbox. Just for context, I actually went back to Modern Warfare 2019 because I still got like the disc of it, and I just skipped around with some bots on there and just spammed the menu as well while I was playing, and we didn't have the same issue there. Now again, I know this isn't a carbon copy situation. I know there's going to be so much more data and high quality assets, etc. in Black Ops 6 that has to be loaded. I get, without understanding the whole like tech reasoning for why the newer game is more of a mess than something that was built for and optimized for the PS4. But it just takes me back to what I was saying earlier, that maybe it's time that we have to leave the old hardware in the past, because even someone like me, as an avid player, a creator around Call of Duty content, you know, I'd probably be looking to return or upgrade if that's how the game plays when it comes out. So I think I'd have to say, if you play on the older generations, PlayStation 4, maybe Xbox One, if I were in your shoes, I wouldn't be pre-ordering. I'd be holding off until launch day or something. I'd wait until I see somebody's review, see some gameplay on Twitch or YouTube or wherever, and just see if this hitching issue has been fixed, because I'm sure that it's something that they potentially could correct. But at the same time, this wasn't a one-game thing for me. This happened every single time that I pressed the scoreboard, the menu, while I was in-game. My gunfights never felt smooth. Everything just felt heavy. And I did try going down to even like 80 FOV, you know, try and get the old console experience, see if that smoothened things out. All it did was accentuate how bad some of the textures are, how like rough and jagged things are. There were straight lines on the edge of walls that just looked like squiggles because they just weren't crisp. And I gotta say, it leaves me with major concerns, not only for how the full game will play when it comes out on those older generation consoles, but how zombies and the campaign are gonna run, particularly where we know that there's more assets, and again, people have paid for that content, but then also Warzone 2. Even Resurgence game modes have so much more data and assets that you have to process when you're playing those games on those like smaller big maps compared to multiplayer. But the idea of playing big map on this, whether it's Urzikstan or whether it's Verdansk when it comes back next year, I cannot see that running as smoothly as it did back in 2020, and 2020 was far from perfect. To round things up, the base takeaway is obviously the better your hardware, the better your experience is going to be. I don't think Black Ops 6 is necessarily a landmark game in terms of like visual beauty in the Call of Duty series. You know, Treyarch games typically aren't. They're more that kind of arcadey art style and stuff. So while there are some differences in the pure visual graphics, I don't think that's the biggest concern, and the real major difference is going to come down to the actual performance, feel, responsiveness of the game on the platform that you're playing on. And yeah, it's fair to say that there are drastic differences between all three platforms that I've tried. You know, 9th generation console to PC, obviously there is an absolute mass more customization. There's so much more visual detail and clarity that you can add to the game. But 9th generation console down to 8th generation console, there are massive performance differences almost across the board. And that's where it gets to a point where I'm kind of saying, does the quality of this game actually meet the standards of what the player base expects when they purchase? And is it a fair experience when you're competing against players on current generation consoles and next generation almost PCs? But like I said, guys, that's just my honest opinion. That's the Black Ops 6 experience on 8th generation and 9th generation consoles, the PS4, Xbox Series X, and PC, with the PC having some of the newest and most powerful hardware that we have on the market today. Let me know in the comments what you think and if you'll be buying Black Ops 6. I'm really keen to hear what people think about the PS4 gameplay and whether it's time to leave old gen in the past, or whether with the size of the player base, it's just not fair to move on yet. If you're new to the channel, please make sure you subscribe. We're on the road to 1K, which is a really exciting milestone for me. And I'll have plenty more Black Ops 6 content coming up on the road to launch and into the full release, where we get our hands on that new Mastery Camo grind on October 25th. I hope this video has been useful for anybody who's yet to decide whether they're going to buy or not. I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.